Ngema. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, you may sit down, please. It's wonderful to be with all of you, and we have two presidents today. Just saying hello to President Kagame. Lovely to be in your beautiful country yet again. So we're going to have two languages, French and English. For those of you who want to hear French translated into English, put your, hi Louise, put your headphones on, number one, and vice versa for number two. So President Tinubu, you may wish to use that when your fellow head of state speaks in French. So you can see what the topic is. It's the sovereign test. Can Africa turn continental alliances into assets, strategic assets? I don't know if some of you, when you arrived in Kigali, saw the some kind of continental framework that identifies what the priorities are, indeed to turn these alliances into strategic assets. It's what President Kagame has said of Africa. He said it of the African Union, but actually it's relevant that Africa suffers from a crisis of implementation. So that's what we want to discuss with our two presidents, is how can we have those cross-border investments, those cross-border regulatory frameworks, tax harmonization, cross-border payments, corporate equity, sharing corporate equity, just de-risking public-private partnerships, you know the whole thing of what we need to do to really get Africa to pull together as one. I think what the Strait of Hormuz crisis has taught all of Africa, just as indeed the COVID crisis did and crises in the past, is nobody's going to do it for Africa. No country in history has been developed by outsiders. It has to mobilize its domestic resources, increase its tax to GDP ratio, 16%, one of the lowest in the world, increase its intra-African trade, 18% compared to, say, 64% in Asia, 67% in Europe. You all know the statistics. So we've got to get Africa moving, looking at itself, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So, President Tinubu, I'll start with you. How can we expect African countries at this critical time when they're under so much pressure, inflationary pressures, the energy crisis and so on, as a result of the Strait of Hormuz conflict, to think regionally or to think in a continent-wide way? They're going to be thinking about their own national priorities, their own people. How can you persuade them to have more of an outward vision?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor being here to review what is ours in Africa. How do we put resources in place, take advantage of the global energy that is we have right now and the situation? It is very welcoming to see that we are up to it. And I must congratulate my brother, the president of, Wanjatu, putting this together, and congratulate all of you organizers and the participants. For me, Africa needs to put its money where its mouth is.
Would you put your microphone where your mouth is? Yeah. Thank you.
We need to put our money where our mouth is and develop a relationship. Luckily, we have African trade agreement that should not be left on the drawing board, should be activated properly. Regional collaboration and effective utilization of our resources. Not working in silos, but in collaboration with one another, using what we have. To me, I believe in Africa first, because I've started Nigeria first. And all resources today We don't want scavengers. We don't want extractors. We want people to add value. If you're an investor, we will encourage you to add value to what we have as a nation before that is. That's it.
Thank you. We'll come to Africa moving up the value chain, but I'll just come to President Oligui Nguema of Gabon, just to ask him really the same opening question, which is, in difficult circumstances where there are crises like the one generated by the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, it's going to be difficult, isn't it, to do precisely that, get continental alliances, because governments inevitably are going to be looking at their own national concerns. So how can you shift the needle at this difficult time?
Thank you very much, Madam, for this question. It is with a lot of enthusiasm that I'm participating in this high-level head of state panel, but before anything, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the President Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, for the welcome and the hospitality to this new edition of the African CEO Forum here in this beautiful city of Kigali, when we breathe the air of an Africa that wins, air of Africa that is reinventing itself. Dear head of states, dear brothers, ladies and gentlemen, CEOs and potential investors, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you my vision on the topic of the day: can Africa turn continental alliances into assets? This topic, as mentioned today regarding the alliances and strategic partnership already implemented since our independence, is not new for Africa. The experience of the air company Air Africa, or our Pan-African radio, Africa #1, for those that remember, were the beautiful materialization of African alliances. But where are we today? Currently, ZLECAf is offering, and framework is really having a difficulty to materialize itself. African countries need to be united to speak on one voice, to mutualize the efforts for an Africa that wins. Let's look at how Europe built itself around industrial, economical, and political alliances. They were able to put in place a common currency, the euro, a common passport, a common visa, Schengen, and with the free movement of people and goods. The European countries have in common an aeronautical company, Airbus, Air France, that extended became KLM. Also, they have a common politic in terms of industry and agricultural politic. So the only divergence for those states is the defense, that's still a tool of sovereignty. So those examples show a simple reality. Economic alliances are tools of power. And we also, in Africa, have our economic alliances to be a powerful continent. So going back to the question of the topic of the day, my answer will be in 3 essential points. The first one, alliances should be around the consolidation of stability and peace. Africa can no longer be a land of conflicts such as we are living currently. My second point is the reinforcement of South and South cooperation to make it a leverage for the economical sovereignty, because Africa can only be built by Africans. So we have to train our continental champions. We already have national companies here, such as CNH, government in Rwanda, that is working in the manufacturing of textile. We have our SIFCA in the sector of agro-industry in Côte d'Ivoire, Mika Service in construction in Gabon, Sarah in the trading of oil countries in product in Nigeria. We have also Dangote in oil refinery in Nigeria. We have also Sonangol in Angola in the extraction of refining of oil products. We also have Arab contractors in roads, bridges, and also bridges in Egypt, just to mention those. So those are African companies that created themselves, supported by the states, and are expecting today that Africa will make them some multinational companies capable to compete with others. So we have to unite to be able to support those companies, to compete with Total and other European companies. We need to create joint ventures between African companies, favor the movement of capitals and intra-African skills, accelerate the construction of inter-regional infrastructure at the image of the corridor of Lobito. My third point is to have a firm dialogue, a true one, and respectful. We need also to respect our commitment. Indeed, Africa should get out of the logic of speeches to take the pathway of solid actions. Our continent has the biggest reserve of raw materials in the world. We should not accept not to misuse them. As the president of Nigeria was saying, we need to understand one another on the transformation of the local transformation of our raw material here on our continent. And this is really essential. It is something that Gabon inserted in its policy of development, and we're not going to back down no matter what the obstacles before those Western countries that refuse to help us.
Given us a very effective blueprint there, which you had prepared, which is extremely useful. Thank you very much indeed. But I would like to come back to you as well on some of the issues that you've raised. But let me ask you, President Tinubu, so a country like Gabon, we know, is very dependent on oil exports. And Africa has always been the exporter of raw materials, crude oil, and then the importer of more expensive finished products. And you mentioned going up the value chain and how Nigeria is going from downstream to midstream to upstream and so on. But for a small country like Gabon, 2.6 million people, I mean, you just can't go it alone there. You can't build a refinery. The Dangote one you mentioned cost $20 billion. So when we're talking about strategic assets that cross borders, is a refinery really one of the obvious ones that you would point at?
Oh, definitely. Today, with the crisis around the world, particularly Iran conflict, Nigeria won't be able to survive with over 200 million people in peace without a refinery. And what a risk taker like a Dangote refinery must be encouraged by the government and power. What I did, support him, gave him free trade zone license, support him in the effort to source the crude that is necessary. And today he is the exporter, net exporter of both the PMS, aviation fuel, and other commodities.
Yeah, we heard that he's favoring all the African carriers, Ethiopian Airlines and so on, for the aviation fuel that's in great demand. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But he's producing 650,000 barrels per day, which is only enough for 70% of Nigeria's needs. So he's still a little bit away from being able to export, you know, refined oil, petrol to his neighbors.
Yes. And it's been supported. You know, my own formula is, like I said, put your money where your mouth is. When about to start a crisis, say, okay, what is the denominated currency in Nigeria? That is Naira. I have crude that you expect me to export in dollar. So I give you, as my local refinery, I give you crude in Naira. No letter of credit, no bank scrambling, and exchange rate instability. Problem.
You meant, yeah, the cross-border payments, which means, you know, African countries don't have to convert to USD and so on. So that, you know, very good, the cross-border payments and so on. But just very quickly as an aside, I mean, you know, I think it was you or maybe President Twandikire Ngema who mentioned monetary union and how the euro has got the euro. So if Europe's got the euro, when will Africa get the afro?
Nigeria, I'll say, and speaking for Africa as African champion, putting our spirit behind what we talk about is creating a platform. Look around the entire continent, 54 countries. There's none of us without a particular commodity available in the country or the other. Why not start an exchange commodity platform where we can trade with one another?
Well, why don't you start one?
You say?
Why don't you start the commodity exchange you're talking about? You're the most numerous country, biggest economy, or South Africa, you know, the two of you battle it out at times, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned commodities, and let me bring in President Twandikire Ngema here, because Gabon, of course, is a big producer of manganese, but it is in its raw form. You haven't managed to move up the value chain, and you know, we're seeing projects in Africa now, Simandu in Guinea with the iron ore there, so that, and we've seen countries like Namibia saying, no, we're not going to export our critical minerals in its raw form, they've got to go somewhere up in the processing chain. But that costs money. So how far is Gabon away from trying to realize going up the value chain with its manganese? Translator's a bit.
Merci, madame.
Thank you. I would like to say something. Gabon is not 3 million people, it's 2 million and 500 people, so 500 less.
I said 2.6.
Nous sommes un grand pays, mais petit par sa population. Et ce qu'il faut chez nous, c'est renforcer le capital humain, amener les jeunes à travailler. La guerre aujourd'hui en Iran, dans le détroit d'Ormuz, devait tous nous interpeller à travailler 2 fois plus. les coûts du pétrole augmentent. Je ne suis pas de ceux qui disent le malheur des uns fait le bonheur des autres, mais je pense que c'est une situation que l'Afrique peut profiter aujourd'hui. C'est de produire tous les barils nécessaires que nous avons sur nos territoires et pour se faire le maximum d'argent afin d'investir pour les générations futures. Et je l'ai dit à mon directeur ou à mon ministre du pétrole, je veux que les productions augmentent. Et elles doivent augmenter. On doit profiter de cette situation. La guerre aujourd'hui en Iran, dans le détroit d'Ormuz, devait tous nous interpeller à travailler 2 fois plus. Les coûts du pétrole augmentent. Je ne suis pas de ceux qui disent le malheur des uns fait le bonheur des autres, mais je pense que c'est une situation que l'Afrique peut profiter aujourd'hui. C'est de produire tous les barils nécessaires que nous avons sur nos territoires et pour se faire le maximum d'argent afin d'investir pour les générations futures. Et je l'ai dit à mon directeur ou à mon ministre du pétrole, je veux que les productions augmentent. Et elles doivent augmenter. On doit profiter de cette situation pour pouvoir payer notre dette, ce que nous devons, et pouvoir aussi investir pour les jeunes, la construction des hôpitaux, des écoles et autres. Pour ce qui est du manganèse, nous avons le manganèse qui dispose de la meilleure teneur au monde. Et nous produisons le manganèse il y a 60 ans que nous produisons le manganèse. Jamais on ne l'a transformé chez nous. Donc c'est une matière première qui se vend ailleurs. Et jamais nous n'avons été également décideurs. Aujourd'hui, ce que nous voulons, c'est que ce manganèse soit transformé. Nous ne voulons plus nous contenter des dividendes. Je m'excuse du terme, les dividendes, c'est une moquerie pour des gens qui exploitent chez vous et qui vous donnent un chèque des dividendes. Vous ne savez pas comment ils ont été calculés, ces dividendes. Nous ne sommes même pas au capital d'administration de cette société qui exploite chez nous. Donc, elle extrait, elle exporte, elle vend, et en fin d'année, on vous amène un chèque. What? Qu'est-ce qui a été vendu? Quelle était la valeur de ce qui a été vendu? Et aujourd'hui, c'est mon combat. Je le dis, je ne chasse personne, mais au Gabon, nous avons changé de paradigme. Nous partons vers la transformation. Et pour nous, c'est sans recul parce que c'est une valeur en plus, une valeur ajoutée. Nous avons donné à cette société une deadline. Si elle n'arrive pas à transformer en 2029, il y a d'autres ici présents qui peuvent venir transformer. Et c'est ce que nous attendons.
I mean, it's interesting the point that you raised, President Oligui Nguema, because of course in the past there have always been just a few partners, but now Africa, holding such a strong card in its hand, having so many of, the critical minerals that we need for our energy transition, for our digital revolution and so on. Africa has a strong card to play, and there are more suitors, as it were. And, we're seeing that now, aren't we? We're seeing, countries like Ghana and Niger getting the Turks to build their airport terminals and so on. So that is something good. But in terms of moving up the value chain, that is something that requires investment. So if I could talk to you first about money, really, because there is a lot of African money. I mean, we've got $2 trillion held in institutional capital from the pension funds and so on and so forth in Africa. But a lot of it goes out of the continent to safer assets in Europe and so on. And the irony is, of course, Africa then has to pay off its debt at much higher interest using foreign money. But there we go, that's another matter. So how can you get that indigenous finance working for Africa? How can governments play a role in de-risking for the private sector? Because if capital was a person, it would be a coward and very, very impatient. They don't want to wait a long time for their returns, and Africa needs patience.
Well, I agree with you. Investment is very cowardly unless you are transparent, accountable, and forthright. And part of that element is African looking at itself, making sure that we can put these resources together and go out there and negotiate for ourselves. To me, I wrote an article in the Financial Times talking about international rating agencies. What do they know about Rwanda? Have they visited Rwanda and seen the potential tourism of this country?
And its growth last year of 9.4%.
9.4%. And if you don't leverage that one in value creation, how can Rwanda benefit?
Well, why don't you get your own African credit rating agency? Because the big American three, Fitch, S&P, and Moody's, they dominate 95% of the market.
We're doing that. That is why we recapitalize all our financial institutions.
Because they give Africa consistently low ratings.
You have to help yourself. Now, no one can take metal out of Nigeria without adding value. No one. Gone are the days where you can excavate the dust, all the minerals, and go. No. I can produce battery for cars with my metals. Rare earth mineral is valuable. But if a Mobil, a Total, a Shell, we value what is on the ground as a balance sheet item capable of funding and raising capital that is necessary for the exploration and production of my resources.
Yeah.
Why not do it for me too?
But you know, and I'll put this to both of you. So the private sector obviously has a role to play. You know, it will bring in its capital and it will bring in its plans and its workers and so on. But it requires governments to play their part in Africa. Capital is also, we said it's a coward, it wants stability. And so it's for African countries and also, you know, in a cross-border way to provide the regulatory frameworks, the strong legal frameworks that capital needs to feel secure in order to flourish. And that is the role of governments. You've got to provide that policy framework for the private sector to say, fine, we'll partner with you. You've also got to de-risk a little bit so that they come in and maybe working with those few DFIs, development finance institutions. So you have, you know, we all know the instruments of blended finance. So government has a role to play. And sometimes, sadly, they don't, do they?
I'm already playing that.
But we're talking continent-wide here.
Removing all the bottlenecks, giving you necessary incentives for direct foreign investment into the country. This year alone, I can beat my chest that Nigeria is attracting close to $20 billion foreign direct investment. It's because unwind the bottlenecks, be efficient, be transparent, be open. There's no intellectual capacity that is deniable by the rest of the world.
Okay. Let's see what President Oligi Nguema says. So government, you have a role to play in creating that enabling environment for the private sector to flourish so you can work together in the way Dangote did with the Nigerian government, with the refinery. Tell this translator to wake up. Oh, I talk
Merci,
very
madame.
fast.
Il y a un adage africain qui dit que pour aller plus loin, il faut aller ensemble. Seul, on n'y arrive pas. Donc, je pense que le secteur privé, tel que je viens de le citer, a besoin de l'accompagnement du secteur public. C'est ensemble que nous allons réussir. Et ces secteurs privés, tels que je le citais, Dangote, Sarah et les autres, aujourd'hui, qui font des efforts à leur niveau, et qui sont là, qui réussissent et qu'ils font. Ils ont également besoin à ce que les chefs d'État africains les accompagnent pour qu'ils deviennent des grandes firmes multinationales. Et également, il n'y a pas que l'État aussi. Il y a aussi nos banques africaines. Il faut savoir investir, accompagner nos entrepreneurs avec les taux minimes, des taux très bas, pour que le secteur public, privé puisse également se développer. Parce que lorsqu'on va emprunter en Europe, c'est avec des taux élevés. Mais on a de l'argent ici sur place chez nous en Afrique. Pourquoi laisser nos entreprises aller emprunter avec des taux élevés et venir réaliser des travaux qui vont nous coûter 2 fois plus cher? Donc nos banques ici doivent également faire des efforts pour accompagner ces entreprises. Mais toujours est-il aussi qu'il faut lutter contre la corruption. Il faut de la transparence à chaque niveau. Parce qu'avec la corruption, l'Afrique ne pourra pas changer. Et nous devons lutter ensemble pour combattre ce fléau.
You need that good governance, of course, which is part of that enabling environment. But there are other things that governments can do to mobilize their domestic resources. And as I said, the tax to GDP ratio in Africa is the lowest in the world at 16%. When you were governor of Lagos, you put a lot of work into doing something there with the local taxes, didn't you? But it's still pitifully low all over Africa.
But today, Lagos State is the 5th largest economy in Africa.
But looking at the I mean, yeah, all right, I'll let you brag about Lagos and Nigeria a bit, but you were chair of ECOWAS.
I'm very proud of the legacy I left behind there.
Okay, all right.
I'm still monitoring that.
You talked about beating your chest, President Tinubu. You've done plenty of that, but you were chair of ECOWAS until last year. So just looking at the region, West Africa, but also the continent as a whole, when we're talking about, mobilizing domestic resources, people don't trust governments. The informal economy is very high, so it makes it much harder to get taxation for the public purse.
Tax reform will have to be written in English language, understandable, and not Japanese in English. A standard that everyone will be able to pay, not for the avoidance, but genuineness of citizenship, right commitment to pay taxes. Write it simple but not stupid. I've reformed that in Nigeria. You can pay your taxes from your telephone. You can assess yourself and you can evaluate yourself so easily from your telephone. It is. What Africa needs is to also put funding in place for research and development. This research and development will get our youths going. They are highly intellectually inquisitive. They will do it. Believe in them.
Yeah, but the budget doesn't go there, does it, into science and R&D? Is it 2%, I think, of African countries' GDP should be paid? Yeah, very low indeed. But when it comes to the private sector, I just want to ask you, President Oligui Nguema, at this point that I'm discussing here with President Tinubu and your taxation regime in Gabon and so on. And as you said, it relies a lot on good governance and people trusting governments. How are you doing in Gabon?
Tant que les choses marchent pour le Gabon, je pense que c'est une très belle stratégie et nous allons continuer sur cette lancée. C'est d'accompagner le secteur privé. On l'accompagne également dans les réformes et dans les lois. Dans les réformes et les lois, il faut amener l'opérateur à pouvoir investir également chez vous. Nous avons revu notre code minier, notre code pétrolier, le code sur les impôts et demandé aux opérateurs de payer les taxes. Oui, nous avons aussi mis en place des exonérations pour accompagner toutes ces sociétés qui exercent chez nous. Des exonérations à hauteur peut-être de 25%, exonération de douane, que nous avons mis en place pour tous ceux qui viennent réaliser également chez nous. Mais l'État fait encore plus. Je me souviens, au début de la transition, lorsque nous avons décidé de nous réapproprier notre pétrole et de racheter les actifs de Assala. C'est d'abord la volonté d'un homme, ma volonté, qui est devenue ensuite une volonté politique. Et nous nous sommes tous mis derrière en disant, il n'est plus question que notre pétrole soit géré de l'extérieur et par certaines compagnies. Et nous avons entendu et nous avons exercé notre droit de préemption sur ce qu'il fallait avec une société américaine pour récupérer 58% de nos actifs pétroliers. Et nous l'avons fait. Donc si l'État a la volonté de faire les choses, on y arrive. Il faut juste un peu de courage. Et c'est ce que nous devons avoir tous en tant que leaders.
Okay, so we've talked about getting, critical minerals from mining to manufacturing, how important that is to go up the value chain. Domestic resource mobilization, you've got a job in trying to encourage domestic banks actually also to invest in Africa. But just looking at these big scalable projects that, reflect cross-border shared interest. Agriculture, obviously, still the biggest employer in Africa, but largely made up of these smallholder farmers. And so when domestic money, domestic banks in Africa are looking for bankable projects, they don't see them in agriculture. Figures say that only between 10 to 20% of smallholder farmers in Africa are commercially viable. Is it time to bite the bullet in a country like Nigeria and just say 10% of African produce is actually refrigerated in the first mile? So infrastructure obviously is at the base of this, and I'll come to that in a moment, but should Africa start thinking about agribusiness?
Very big indeed. Africa needs to do that, particularly a nation like Nigeria, with over 900,000 kilometers of arable land. Food sovereignty is crucially important for us. Now, the government, first of all, must identify critical areas of need for those farmers. Critical is infrastructure. How do you enlarge infrastructure? How do you promote agriculture? For example, Bank of Agriculture in Nigeria, scale. Then, gone were the days when agriculture is no longer sexy. Bending the back and not mechanized. Today, I have over 6,000 zones of mechanization in Nigeria. And the government must identify energy sources for preservation of those items, buy back from the farmers when the prices are very low and frustrating, and have storage silos, and when the market is better, help the farmers. It's not possible for the farmers to be on subsistence farming alone and think it will be profitable. Highly yield seeding must be provided to those farmers. Now, let me give you an example. In Nigeria, the Sokoto-Badagry road that I embark upon is 1,000 kilometers of road that is going to link Benin Republic and all the way to Ghana by the time we finish. When I embark on the road, I call Boa, call Dangote, you are cement producers. I'm not going to import bitumen. I'm going to use the concrete road that will last about 500 years, if it is possible.
Hold it up higher.
And that's what I did. when you see this road today, they are all concrete. I didn't have to import bitumen.
Yeah. Of course, the big cement kings. So, okay, you're talking about infrastructure, and we are seeing also cross-border infrastructure projects like the ZTK and also the Lobito corridor, which I think one of you mentioned, you know, linking Lobito in Angola with the DRC and Zambia. But let me ask you, Mr. President, in terms of infrastructure, Africa's got a long way to go, not only just the physical infrastructure, but also digital infrastructure. You know, the digital revolution is very important in Africa. We have a huge deficit of about 100 billion a year in building infrastructure. So what would you like to see within the confines of this conversation we're having about cross-border strategic assets in infrastructure, apart from the refineries which we've talked about?
Merci. Nous avons beaucoup investi dans des infrastructures. Mais quand on parle d'infrastructures également, après il faut parler d'énergie, il faut parler d'électricité. Parce que les deux vont ensemble. L'énergie aujourd'hui, c'est le développement. L'énergie, quand vous apportez de la lumière dans un village, le tout change. Vous pouvez avoir une raffinerie, si vous n'avez pas d'énergie, elle ne va pas fonctionner. Donc je pense que là aussi, il faut mettre l'accent sur l'énergie. Et pour notre cas au Gabon, comme vous étiez en train de parler de l'agriculture, nous sommes en train de faire cette transition énergétique. Une transition énergétique qui va nous amener vers l'agriculture, parce que nous importons plus de 70% de ce que nous mangeons au Gabon. Ça vient des pays amis. Et aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de mettre en place une politique pour la réservation des terres. Nous avons des terres agricoles. Et nous demandons à tout le monde de venir investir parce que c'est encore un champ qui est vastement large, où on peut facilement investir. Nous avons pris une décision de mettre fin à l'importation de poulets de chair, de pouvoir produire localement notre propre poulet de chair. Et pour accompagner nos agriculteurs au pays, nous avons mis un fonds de 25 milliards de francs CFA. Nous avons créé la Banque de l'entrepreneuriat avec des taux beaucoup plus réduits pour que ces jeunes agriculteurs, éleveurs puissent également emprunter et pour développer ce secteur dans l'entrepreneuriat. Maintenant, après, il faut encourager la jeunesse. Nous avons une jeunesse bureaucratique qui a grandi dans l'administration, un peu dans le pétrole. Et j'avoue que ce n'est pas facile de faire cette transition énergétique avec la jeunesse. Mais en forçant, nous allons y arriver. Parce qu'ils vont finir par comprendre que lorsqu'on mange, on arrive à mieux travailler. Donc, nous devons produire beaucoup plus que ce que nous importons pour pouvoir également baisser notre coût de vie.
Of course.
Bon, parce que le coût de vie il est très élevé au Gabon. Le panier de la ménagère.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's shocking that the whole of Africa, the annual food import bill is $80 billion, a continent that could feed the entire world. You also mentioned electrification. I mean, I was very struck actually by Rwanda has got such a remarkable story to tell in terms of its electrification program. It was something like 8% in 2009. It's now 80% of households are actually electrified. But as the World Bank says, electrification alone is not enough unless it creates jobs and boosts economic growth. And obviously, energy poverty in Africa, we know 640 million people don't have access to electricity across the continent and so on. It's going to be a big focus for infrastructure. But before we finish, I just want to ask you about the digital revolution, because of course, internet use in Africa is extremely low. It's something like 36% compared to the global average of 74%. And so, you know, we're going to risk having a world of digital haves and have-nots, and also between people in Africa. And so digital infrastructure, again, is something that transcends borders. You know, so is that something that's on everybody's radar amongst at the presidential table?
It is. And where we've embarked upon over 9,000 90,000 fiber optic lane across the country. And that is the only way we can bring lessons to children and communicate with farmers as well. And ordinary traders are in need. No, it is where we must be able to put funding together to help Africa surpass the level of primitive telecommunication program.
And bring in AI and all the rest of it. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah, and e-commerce.
We need to leapfrog.
But to leapfrog, it's not just like the mobile phone technology for the AI revolution. You need a skilled labor force, you need the digital infrastructure, the data processing and storage and data collecting and all the rest of it. And Rwanda, I think, is positioning itself as a sort of African superpower in that regard.
That is what our institutional, financial houses are for. No, guaranteed investment. These are investment that's, have high yield of returns. So they should be able to do that. And a government like ours is ready to de-risk an investor, bold enough to do that. It's not luxury, but a necessity for us to be in a 21st century class of communication.
Okay. So just really, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which sort of came into being in earnest in 2021. And it very much embodies the kind of Pan-African spirit and, domestic resource mobilization, looking at yourselves and the continent in order to prosper. But we are starting from a very low base, 18%. Of intra-African trade in Africa is intra-African. Are you optimistic?
I am.
You are?
Very optimistic. We have a very dynamic, youthful population, restless and not ready to take excuses. I'm a politician. If I don't get them ready for that, they will vote me out.
I was talking to one of the delegates here, Ebenezer Asante from MTN, and he said to me, if you get the chance to ask the president, say to them, listen, politics always gets in the way of integration, is what he said. He's right.
He's right.
Yeah. But you're the politician. You can do something about that and use your influence across the continent.
Okay. A politician is a critical member of your society. He must listen to you, respond to you, and answer to the public, can be accountable.
President Oligui Nguema, just this issue of, Pan-African and its Pan-Africanism, we hope it's a light sleeper, because it's been around a long time, and, we've seen the kind of national sort of resource nationalism is what I want to say on a national level, which kind of works against that sometimes. But do you think the Pan-African spirit evoked by things like the free trade area means that it's the zeitgeist now, it's the direction of travel?
Oui, madame, je pense que la digitalisation, elle est inévitable. Et elle est là déjà. Et on doit faire avec, on doit l'accepter. Hier, ce pays, on disait c'était le pays de 1000 collines, le Rwanda. C'est comme ça qu'on l'appelait. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est le pays de l'innovation technologique. On voit tout ce qui s'est passé ici et comment le président Paul Kagame a réussi dans cette technologie. Donc la digitalisation...
Have you been to Technology City? I passed it by. It's this kind of hub for startups and young people in Rwanda who go in and they're learning. I'm doing President Kagame's job here in selling Rwanda. But anyway, yes, it is amazing what's going on here. Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
Et donc, c'est dire que la digitalisation, c'est quelque chose qu'on ne peut plus refuser, d'autant plus qu'elle booste les recettes. Elle apporte des recettes énormes On a vu dans certains pays où les chefs d'État le disaient, avec la digitalisation, je fais 150 milliards de recettes. L'informel est combattu à travers la digitalisation. Il y a moins de fraude, il y a moins de corruption. Donc il faut accepter. Au Gabon, nous l'avons déjà accepté et nous l'avons inclus dans notre programme de développement. Nous sommes aujourd'hui en train de digitaliser tout le secteur administratif. Et nous irons même encore plus loin. C'est de digitaliser également les marchés, de digitaliser tous les secteurs. Le numérique, on en fait. On commence à enseigner des élèves dans des salles de classe comment utiliser le numérique, comment mettre en relation sur ces plateformes Internet, l'intelligence artificielle et autres. Donc nous l'avons accepté parce qu'on a compris qu'aujourd'hui, on ne peut plus rien faire sans le numérique, sans l'intelligence artificielle. La digitalisation est là. Nous sommes en train de mettre en place chez nous des data centers. Oui, les data centers, c'est un peu décevant parce que les compagnies qui nous les mettent chez nous, c'est des compagnies occidentales, étrangères. Et après, on pense un peu à la fuite des données. Donc il faut que notre jeunesse soit également formée pour pouvoir prendre le relais, la relève, et de contrôler ces data centers qui sont en train d'être mis chez nous. Sinon après, c'est notre économie qui s'en va et qui sera contrôlée par les autres. C'est ce que nous voulons.
Okay. So a final question to both of you. You know, the theme of this summit has been shaping the future of Africa, scaling up, moving forward together, these continental alliances that, you know, we've been discussing. Do you feel that perhaps this latest crisis in Hormuz is just one of a series of global shocks that may galvanize Africans, be a catalyst so that you can accelerate on the path to greater unity, greater alliances, and forging cross-border strategic interests? Do you think? Because I remember when COVID came and, you know, people in Europe and North America were being triple vaccinated and Africans were getting the crumbs off the table. I never knew Africans so angry as that time, and it seemed to me that was an inflection point of Africa saying, look, you know, we're going to have to look at ourselves. Do you think that this could be a turning point, and is that what you'd like this CEO forum to come out when it ends with this kind of communique that Africa is at this turning point? President Ikaze Ngema.
Moi, je pense que oui, on peut y arriver. Il suffit seulement de croire. Si l'Europe est arrivée, nous aussi, on peut y arriver. Il faut avoir la volonté. Je le disais que l'Europe s'est mise en avant avec des alliances et autres. Nous aussi, nous devons être unis et forts dans nos alliances. Nous devons tout booster pour arriver à ce que l'Afrique se développe, à ce que l'Afrique aille beaucoup plus loin. S'il me venait de dire quelques mots au regard de ce qui précède, de tout ce que nous avons dit, moi je dis oui, si l'Afrique est unie, elle peut transformer ses alliances continentales en actifs stratégiques. Le panafricanisme est un atout majeur. On a toujours tendance à vouloir l'oublier. Nous sommes panafricanistes et il faut tout faire pour l'être. Ce n'est pas seulement dans les discours qu'il faut le dire, mais il faut le vivre et il faut l'appliquer. C'est quelque chose qui en nous et dans nos cœurs et qu'on ne peut pas le rejeter. Parce qu'on se sent africain, on veut bien être développé comme les autres, on n'a plus envie que nos enfants aillent mourir en mer, la plonge pour traverser, pour aller vers d'autres continents. Donc nous avons toute la matière ici pour réussir. Il suffit de ce que moi je tenais à dire. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ikaze Ngema. And last word to you, President Tinubu. What would you like to hear from this CEO forum at the end of it all?
At the end of this, once again, I congratulate the organizers, all of you participants, Paul, Kigame being.
It always seems impossible until it is done. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I suppose, could I invite Makhtar Diop and Amir from the organisers to come and take a photograph with our two presidents and, of course, His Excellency President Kagame.
The annual Africa CEO Forum.
L'Africa CEO Forum.
Africa CEO Forum.
Le Davos africain.
Biggest event of its kind on the continent.
The best partner for